My guest today is one of the most outspoken voices when it comes to connecting macroeconomics, digital assets, and wealth preservation. Vandal Altera. As the co founder of Black Swan Capitalist, he has built a strong reputation for breaking down complex financial dynamics in a way that anyone can understand. On his channel, he analyzes the intersection of traditional markets, gold, and cryptocurrencies, especially XRP, and how they fit into the bigger picture of the global financial system. With his background in banking and years of experience as a macro analyst, he combines critical thinking with clear communication, making him one of the most influential educators in the space. I'm really excited to have him on the show today. Have fun. Hey, Wendell, nice to have you here as my guest.
Hi, yes. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I really admire your YouTube channel. I think you did a great job building a great community. So I'm happy to be here and speak with you over the camera. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are talking about XRP, gold, and the Great Reset, the future of global finance, Vandal. And let's start with the first question for you. XRP, it's one of your strongest convictions. You often said XRP is the key altcoin for the coming wealth transfer. Why XRP in particular, not something like Solana, for example? And how does it fit into your idea of a financial system that stays the same, just more efficient?
Yeah, so to answer your question, XRP is a very unique digital asset, not only because it has a very long outstanding history, but at the same time, it was structurally designed from a fundamental perspective to move value. So it's perfectly engineered for financial institutions to move value and tackle cross-border payments and eventually the derivatives market. Now, the value lies in the protocol, which is of the XRPL, the XRP network. So it's very different from other altcoins and digital assets, for example, Solana, which is actually designed for retail and applications, for example. But XRP, it's a financial instrument designed to move value instantly and cheaply and efficiently, basically settling transactions instantly by providing on-demand liquidity. So this is a technology that we've never had ever throughout history. So it brings a very unique solution to the table that is actually very intriguing for financial institutions and global powers. So it's not intriguing for the middleman, the little guys, because their business model relies on being the middleman to settle payments and take advantage of fractional reserve lending. But essentially, the global powers that are higher up the ladder, the food chain, they find it very intriguing and it's appealing. And I actually think they were some of the, along with some agencies, behind the funding of XRP's initial creation, which is a whole different story. But to answer your question, it's specifically engineered and designed structurally to move value instantly, no matter how large the value is. Now, a lot of other assets out there are capable of doing similar things,
Yeah,
but
that
they
was my
don't.
question. Ethereum, maybe, for example, what is the difference between it? It also can move value, isn't it?
Yes, a lot of these digital assets and their blockchains can move value, but at the same time, they lack other criteria that's critical for financial institutions. So moving value is one of them, but being able to move value at the lowest rate, so very cheaply, fractions of a penny. So it has to be cost efficient. It has to be instant. And that's where on-demand liquidity comes in and XRP because it's instant settlement. And at the same time, it has to be scalable to take on a growing economy. And this is a critical piece that a lot of other blockchain technologies do not have because they're designed for different purposes. And I know there's a lot of people in the space that like to focus on favoritism. So favoring one over another, saying this is the best or that's the best. But in reality, when you zoom out and look at all these different technologies and look at the traditional financial system and the global economy, you'll understand that these technologies, some of them, are actually designed to complement each other. They're not competing with one another. And that's the key here, because they're not designed to do the same thing. They're designed to tackle different issues in the global economy and the financial system from a institutional level and then also down to a retail level.
Did you heard of the CBOS announcement where Consensus will make the prototype with Swift? So there's always the discussion between, is it XRP or is it Ethereum? You said they will coexist. How can you explain this in the bigger picture?
Yeah, so first of all, I can tell you from experience, never place a lot of value on articles, news, and narratives. XRP has been around since it was created as OpenCoin, the Ripple company, since 2012. And ever since 2012 until today, 2025, there have been countless articles, narratives, stories, headlines saying this or that, and look how far we've come today. At the end of the day, Ripple has been seen in pictures sitting with Christine Lagarde, who used to be the head of the IMF, International Monetary Fund. This is a financial institution that oversees monetary policy, and they're basically like a lender of last resort, a safety net for different countries around the world and the financial system. Ripple has sat at the table with these people. Additionally, Ripple and Brad Garlinghouse have been in collaboration with many different financial institutions. So over the years, if you look at all the pieces of the puzzle that have been put together and playing out, you'll actually see that a lot of the previous news articles, whether it's rooted in truth or not, at the end of the day, the fundamentals do not change. So I've learned throughout my career in banking, in finance, that a lot of times the news and media will manufacture different types of stories, sometimes some true, some not, but they will manufacture different stories and narratives to actually strategically misdirect the public. So I really don't place too much value on what they're saying. I focus on the fundamentals. As long as the fundamentals have not changed, then my investment thesis is not changing. And so far, as I said, since 2012 till today, there has been countless stories of new technologies replacing this, doing that, new partnerships with a different entity, and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. As long as the fundamentals don't change, it has long-term growth potential because of its utility and use cases within the financial system. And it has also a very appealing component to it, which is the XRP ledger, the network, because of its capabilities. And this is very appealing to global powers and financial institutions that really control the money. So whether they partner with a different company or Swift uses a different technology or company, it does not change the actual long-term outcome in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Ultimately, XRP, and like any asset, its price is driven by only one thing, and that's supply and demand. Economics 101. So over time, as the demand increases, there's a limited supply. The price will only go up. And there are two forces that will push the price up, creating that demand. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the news says.
The two forces that that rise to demand are the two ones.
Yeah, the first one is currency debasement. As long as central banks are printing money, it doesn't matter how they do it. They like to come up with fancy words and terminology to confuse the public. But money printing is credit creation, increasing the debt ceiling, debt creation. It could be from commercial banks, but at the end of the day, the outcome is printing money. And as long as they're increasing the money supply, currency units in the money supply, those currency units, fiat currency, is what we measure crypto in. We measure XRP in dollars. We measure assets in dollars. So as long as they're increasing the amount of currency in the system, that currency debasement pushes up the asset prices when measured in fiat currency. So this is one force. The second force is demand. Because of XRP's use case, utility, and ability to settle transactions globally instantly, this will create institutional demand over time as more mainstream Wall Street adoption takes place from an institutional level. So this will ultimately create more demand over time. Demand is what will push price up. So basically, you have money printing, currency debasement, which pushes asset prices up. And then on the other side, you have demand, which will come from institutions pushing price up. But demand, it doesn't matter if it comes from retail or institutions. Demand is demand. And if there's a limited supply, it pushes the price up when measured in fiat currency.
Which leads us to the second question, because demand is also because of the ETFs, October, that it could be the month of ETFs. So everybody's saying it. And we now have a Bitcoin ETFs. But when it comes to XRP, and that's a question, big players like BlackRock are still absent. Why do you think they are not stepping in, Vandel?
Oh, it's actually very simple. Institutions at this level, BlackRock, that has their hands in everything, every company in the world, they do things on a very specific script and calendar. So if they have not released or created an XRP ETF yet, it's because of timing and regulation. Everything is about timing for them. So packaging Bitcoin as an ETF is the easiest because Bitcoin has been around for the longest. People are aware of what Bitcoin is. There's more attention, more spotlight on it. And it's the king or the first one in the crypto ecosystem. So it's the easiest to package and roll out. But essentially, it's timing and regulation. I've noticed that the ETF that got launched recently created a lot of demand. The Bitcoin ETF created a lot of liquidity coming into Bitcoin. So the ETFs will provide liquidity into these assets because it forces institutions to actually buy that asset. So it creates more demand from an institutional level, and it injects more liquidity into these assets, essentially. But to answer your question, it's about timing and regulation. So as for regulation, this is a clear setup. They need regulations in place. They need to understand whether this asset is in compliance, whether it's a security, it's not, it's a commodity, what is it? And regulations, as simple as that. Because these institutions want to be on the right side of the law. The last thing they want is headaches, lawsuits, and all kinds of other issues and uncertainty. As for the timing, there could be many reasons. We could speculate many reasons.
Do you think that they will follow 2026 maybe?
My belief is they will launch an XRP ETF around altcoin season. I think this is a strategic timing to increase retail interest and bring in more liquidity and demand from the retail side. It's interesting because ever since 2009, when Bitcoin was launched, Bitcoin has been following every 4 years a bull run.
Yes.
But every 4 years since 2009, every 4 years, the central banks, the government, they have debt and they have to refinance it. So in order to refinance the debt, they have to inject liquidity into the system in order to refinance and roll over the debt. And the debt has a maturity date 4 to 5 years. So every 4 years since 2009, when they refinance the debt and inject liquidity in order to refinance the debt, you have a Bitcoin crypto bull run. That's why every few years we have a bull run at the same time when they refinance the debt and inject liquidity into the system. The timing is too perfect to be a coincidence. It's by design. And crypto, including Bitcoin, including XRP, they follow the debt-based cycle, which coincides with the liquidity cycle at the same time. So it would make sense logically for them to roll out an ETF at the end of this year, because that's when they have to refinance the bulk, most of the treasury debt, which is a little over $9 trillion as we speak.
Wow.
And it would make sense to roll out the ETF around that time, because around that time, you'll have the most explosive retail interest coming into the space. It's also interesting because historically, from a crypto analysis cycle perspective, you'll notice that every 4 years, the retail interest spikes and we get an altcoin season. And this is a byproduct of explosive liquidity, and it's also a byproduct of institutions and big crypto companies running marketing campaigns to get retail in. The
Do you
same time
recognize
they
this?
refinance.
Do you recognize
Yes.
this at the moment, that we will also see the same like in the last cycles? Many don't know, also how should I say? They don't know if we will have an icon season in the last quarter or maybe 2026. So we don't know. Do you think we will repeat the same?
Yes, what's very interesting here, based on my analysis, is there are two outcomes. The first outcome is this plays out similar to previous ones. So the most explosive end of the cycle will be in Q4, so starting October into December. That's a possibility. It depends how fast the sequence of events play out. The second potential is the bull run peaking and altcoin season spills over into Q1 of 2026. Now, of course, it's possible it could extend longer, but based on current dynamics, the debt refinance cycle, global liquidity, which actually will be peaking around February or March of 2026, there are many different factors that could potentially take us into 2026. But an explosive peak of Bitcoin, eventually Ethereum, large caps, and then other digital assets and altcoins, altcoin season, this is inevitable. And this will be always at the end of the cycle. But currently, we're exhibiting similar patterns to previous cycles. But at the same time, there are some very subtle differences this time around. So to answer your question, yes, it could be the end of the year. It depends how fast things play out in the crypto space. But at the same time, it could spill over, in my opinion, to early 2026. But I still think we're going to have a very explosive altcoin season. And these prices will be reaching very new all-time highs, but this will be driven by retail
Campaigns.
coming in. Yes, that too.
Yeah.
Bringing in retail, and retail will be buying the top, pushing prices to very irrational levels.
Hmm. And
And this,
afterwards?
well, historically, every time we push prices to irrational levels, this is considered overvaluations. We have a a crash or a cool down. Mhm.
Do you think we
Because
will
it's
have a very strong cool down?
based on the data I'm looking at, it depends how strong the run up is. So the stronger the run up, the explosiveness, vertical, there will definitely be a significant steep correction. Yes.
Mm.
But if it's very gradual and steady, then the cool down or the correction could be, um, it would not be too extreme. But at the same time, all the data is suggesting that we are about to go vertical very soon.
Mm.
We're seeing all the pieces of the puzzle put in place that historically have led to that last part of the altcoin season. It's
Mm.
not here yet, but it looks like it's coming. Now, if we go in that direction and we have a very explosive move up, then yes, there will be a pretty steep correction. It doesn't matter if there's ETFs,
Mm.
because institutions, they think long term, of course. But at the same time, institutions are in the business, and I know from experience, institutions are in the business of maximizing profit and profiting off volatility. Now, if there are ETFs, it does not mean there will not be a correction. We actually saw a correction after the Bitcoin ETFs were launched,
Yes.
after we went to new all-time highs and then it came down. And it's
Mm.
because things got pushed up to irrational levels. But this was not the highest things were going to go. This
Mm.
was driven by ETFs and hype and institutional inflows.
Mm.
So I do see it coming to a point in the very near future where all the macro factors are going to support conditions that lead to an explosive move in altcoins. Mhm.
Mm. It's very interesting because a gold, it's an asset of a physical asset, an old asset. It has also been raining lately, and many frame it as either gold or crypto. You take a different approach and value both. How do you see that relationship when it comes to building and protection wealth?
Yes, I think it's so important today in today's world. People have very much, they have to seriously consider and rethink how they protect their wealth, because the situation today is very different from 30 and 20 years ago. In today's environment, we are in a period of very huge currency debasement taking place, which means central banks creating credit, debt issuance, and printing money. This directly impacts people's lives because it's destroying their buying power. But it directly impacts asset prices. It's called monetary inflation. Now, this is a period that we have never seen in history at this extreme. Except every time when we did see something close to this, it led to eventually hyperinflation. Now, we're not there yet, but to answer your question, people they have to think differently about how they protect their wealth. And gold, I don't see it as a competing asset with digital assets or cryptocurrency. I think gold always will have a core place in people's portfolio to preserve wealth. Um, Gold has been around for over 5,000 years. Every empire that collapsed, every currency that collapsed, every economy that collapsed, gold has withstood the test of time and actually survived until
Mm.
today. And actually, when this system officially died, one could argue in 2009, that's exactly the time when central banks globally decided to become net buyers of physical gold. And ever since 2009, central banks have been accumulating physical gold in their vaults at record levels each year, and they're doing it again this year. And also the Bank of International Settlements quietly moved gold from a tier 3 asset, which was considered risky. They moved it to a tier 1 asset class, which is considered zero counterparty risk, which means basically it's the safest tangible asset to own during this period. But at the same time, their actions speak louder than their words. They've been accumulating physical gold while at the same time building research and development for digital blockchain technology systems. But they're actually accumulating physical gold. So their actions say a lot. But at the same time, we have history to show us that as they continue printing money and debasing the currency, gold only rises in value because we're measuring that gold in fiat currency. So gold is a critical piece to a very strong portfolio if you want to focus on preserving wealth over time. Because gold is not an investment. I see it as an insurance policy against reckless monetary policy, against money printing. So it will always hold its value over time. Even if it crashes, it will catch up eventually. And as for digital assets, the key here for strategic positioning is to own digital assets that will actually carry their value over into the new system and also grow in value because of demand. And that demand will come from real use case, real utility, real fundamentals solving real problems. And that's the key there, is to diversify strategically in assets that will still be around as we make the transition into the new system. Because currently, Steffi, we're living through the reset, but it's not complete.
So, which leads us to the next question, Wendell. Some banks, like the Deutsche Bank, for example, suggest Bitcoin could become a reserve asset by 2030. Do you see Bitcoin really playing that role, or will it remain more of a hedge alongside gold and stable coins?
To be honest, my view is very contrarian. First of all, I don't believe anything that any of these institutions say. I was a banker at Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, and one thing we were taught to do is talk in circles and strategically mislead people. So I'm telling you that just because they say something, it doesn't matter how profound the company is. It doesn't matter what title they have, CEO, Larry Fink, head of BlackRock, Fox News, doesn't matter. When they say something, it will be in your best interest to not take what they say immediately at face value and don't place too much weight on it. So their statement that they made, I'm not sure why they're saying that. Maybe they have analysts that have drawn that conclusion and maybe they believe it's a potential. But I personally don't see that occurring. I don't see Bitcoin having any structural role in the new financial system, because when the financial system fully becomes tokenized and digitized and the financial reset fully manifests, which will happen once we see severe problems in the financial system, they will have to introduce a solution. When that reset takes place, some of these technologies will be rolled out and used, and this will be mainstream global adoption from a utility perspective. Now, this is important because when that moment happens, when that comes, when we're in the early stages of it, but it hasn't happened yet. Still till today, even fundamentally strong cryptocurrencies and digital assets, they follow Bitcoin. They move when liquidity is in, they go up. When liquidity comes out, they go down. This is considered a risk-on speculative asset. That's the behavior. But when utility really kicks in and adoption takes place to use these technologies, I believe there will be some degree of price stability. But at that point, if Bitcoin doesn't offer any utility from a structural plumbing perspective for the financial system, then it's just treated as a speculative investment. Basically, by definition, I'm not saying Bitcoin is a Ponzi, but I look at it as one to some degree because it exhibits some similar characteristics. For example, you have early buyers that make the money as it goes up, and then they sell it to people that are buying late. So it's like playing musical chairs. And basically, everybody is getting in, hoping that they could sell the asset higher to somebody else buying late. Now, if there's no utility behind it that fits into the digitization of the financial system from a structural perspective, then what value is it holding besides just being a speculative investment to hedge against currency debasement? Because eventually the financial system is supposed to evolve to a point where currency debasement is not happening the way it is today. So what would be the need for Bitcoin in that type of situation once the system evolves? Now I understand. But at the same time, even today, Bitcoin is not a wealth creation vehicle for the little guy because most people can't even afford half a Bitcoin. So for it to just double your money, you need to buy one whole Bitcoin and it has to go up 2 times for you to double your money. Most people are not in that camp where they can afford that. So from a wealth creation perspective, it's actually beneficial to use as a wealth vehicle to create wealth and double your wealth if you're a high net worth individual at this stage. Now, of course, I wish I bought Bitcoin many, many years ago. I really do. It's something I missed, to be honest. But it's very difficult to say for sure whether it will have a role as sitting on the balance sheets of these entities. I really don't see that happening, to be honest. I certainly do not see it playing a role as a reserve currency. I don't. Because I think there are technologies that are more efficient, more scalable, that actually entities and governments know who created them. And this is key. Because the truth is, no government or entity is going to adopt a technology and use it as a world reserve currency if they don't even know who made it. This is fantasy. And they would like to tell you that's not the case. But the truth is, no government will use a currency and make it a world reserve currency without knowing who created it, especially if it has volatility and fluctuations between 50 and 80%. So at the end of the day, a lot of these countries and nations, they've disagreed on many things, cultural stuff, this, that, but there are a few things that they agreed on. And one of them is that the US dollar will continue to play its role as a robust world reserve currency. And they actually just created a solution to make sure that is the case. And that's where stablecoins come in.
Stablecoins, yes.
Yes. So as you can see, everything is playing out just how they want it to. It's just the system is evolving and they're using these technologies to continue keeping the world reserve currency robust and continue kicking the debt-based system down the road, to keep the debt-based system surviving, essentially. So yes, but that's my opinion. I don't see Bitcoin becoming a world reserve currency. If anything, go ahead.
So more a hedge.
I think it's a hedge as long as it's alive, but 16 years is, in my opinion, this is my opinion, of course. I don't think 16 years of history is enough to know for sure if it's a hedge, because it has very extreme volatility because it's directly tied to liquidity. So when liquidity is drawn down by the central banks and moving out the system, Bitcoin crashes, which happens to be, interestingly, every 4 years. When liquidity is injected into the financial system, Bitcoin rises in price and then other cryptocurrencies follow. So Bitcoin has about, I'd say, close to a 90% correlation with liquidity. So it's that closely tied to it. Now, a store of value, it does exhibit some characteristics of a store of value, but the significant drawdown due to liquidity and uncertainty is not considered a store of value. And I'll give you one example. In April of this year, Trump announced tariffs, the trade war. What happened is the Treasury auction sold off. So Treasury, US debt, took a hit. It sold off. And nobody showed up at the Treasury auction to buy US Treasuries because there was a lot of uncertainty with geopolitics and the trade wars. So what happened during that period? Crypto and Bitcoin took a huge correction. What's interesting is if Bitcoin was a hedge against uncertain geopolitical events like that, Bitcoin would have held stable or it would have rose in price, because that's what gold did. Gold went up. That is the definition of a store of value in geopolitical uncertainty in the financial system and in the world. And that is a prime example. And Bitcoin did the opposite. It crashed, actually. Not a crash, but a correction. It came down. So that's just one example. But a store of value has a few different characteristics. And one of them is it's supposed to be stable in times of desperation and serious uncertainty in the world and in the financial system. But it did the opposite. So that's one point there, but very critical to pay attention to because it showed what kind of characteristics it has and whether it's a store of value or not during that period.
So stable coins made the dollar strong again. We have just spoken about it, that they keep the US debt machine running. Does that just continue endlessly with more and more debt? Or does it eventually lead to a reset, a crash, or maybe just be a smoother upgrade of the system?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. I've thought very deeply about this and I've assessed the situation and the mechanics behind what they're doing. I also looked at the Genius Act. So what's interesting is the stable coins actually assist the government with keeping the US debt machine alive, basically, the US debt-based system. The stablecoins allow it to stay strong. And the reason is because currently the financial system is having a lot of issues, but it starts with the US dollar and the treasuries, the US debt, and the bond market. So the goal of the Federal Reserve in America, and America, their currency, the US dollar, is still the world reserve currency. So when anything happens to the US dollar, it globally affects the entire world because about 60% of all debt in the world is denominated in US dollars. And that's because the US currency is the world reserve currency. Now, in order to keep the world reserve currency, the US dollar, they need buyers of US treasuries, US debt. Now, the problem is there is demand for US debt still, but there's not enough demand as there was before, because a lot of these central banks are not interested in holding US debt because they don't trust America can pay back their debt. And clearly they can't, because the debt keeps rising and we never pay it back. So countries are more interested in buying less US treasuries, US debt, and they're actually buying more physical gold. So right now what we have is a demand problem for US treasuries. When you have a demand problem for US treasuries, what happens is the system will collapse if you do not have enough buyers on the other end. So they came up with a very intelligent scheme called the Genius Act. And indeed, it is genius because, yes, so the Genius Act is specifically about stablecoins, stablecoin regulation, but there's more pieces to it. So in the Genius Act, for the stablecoin bill, it forces stablecoin issuers that issue a stablecoin, they have to buy an equivalent of US treasuries for every stablecoin issued. Now, in the bill, it does not say you have to buy US treasuries. It says for every stablecoin issued, the issuer is required to buy high quality reserve assets. By definition, in practice, a high quality reserve asset is US debt and US treasuries. So basically, they created a situation where as stablecoins grow, which they are growing, every stablecoin issuer creating a stablecoin has to buy US debt. So the stablecoins are designed to create artificial demand for US treasuries. And this little cycle here is what will keep the US dollar as the global world reserve currency. And this will keep the debt-based system continuing. Now, as long as we have a debt-based system, to answer your last question, they can continue printing and printing and printing until we see something like Weimar Germany, where you needed a wheelbarrow of cash to buy one piece of bread. This is hyperinflation. So basically, the Stablecoin Act, the bill, this mechanism allows them to continue printing money and issuing debt and preserve the integrity of the bond market, which is the most important piece to the whole financial system. So they can continue kicking it down the road. But what this means for regular people is that...
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, it means that they're going to continue printing money to fund the governments, because currently we are in a fiscal dominated regime where government funding is the most important thing taking place right now. And the central banks and monetary policy are a slave to helping the governments fund themselves. Now, to continue government funding, to keep the system alive and the government functioning, we see the debt continuing to increase, because every time they issue debt, eventually all debt comes due. So it has to be paid or refinanced. Now, refinance meaning basically you just push it aside and you take care of it another day. And that's why the debt keeps growing and growing. It never gets paid. They just keep refinancing it ever since 2009. And every 4 or 5 years, they continue to refinance the debt, and the debt continues to grow in America. But what this means for regular people is now with the stable coins, they can continue doing this for a long time. So what I see happening is people need to think about how they protect their wealth, because as long as they're issuing debt, printing money, funding the government, increasing the money supply, people's buying power will continue to decline, which means we are living through a period of wealth consolidation, where they're pushing the wealth higher up the food chain, and you're going to see more and more people fall further behind as they destroy your buying power. So the key here is back to what we said earlier. Find ways to preserve your wealth and find ways to invest in assets that will carry their value in the new system and grow in value. Because they're going to continue doing this until the money printing does not work anymore. But by that time, there will be a lot of high inflation. If we study history, historically, every currency reset has been the result of governments rising unsustainable debt levels, high inflation, and then eventually social and civil unrest. And then things collapse and they introduce a new currency, a currency reset. Historically, it's always been because of the debt and the money printing and high inflation. Now, currently, we're seeing the early stages of that.
So, if I can summarize it, stablecoins are the solution from the United States to keep the system alive so that we don't will see this crash, but only a smoother upgrade of the system as long as the stablecoin market will rise and refinance the debt of the United States. Um, yeah.
Yes, they're giving the financial system a reset, and they're doing it with blockchain technology. So it's like a digital facelift, basically, because they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They love the system the way it is. It allows the rich to get richer. See, the system is a blessing and a curse. If you're smart and if you own assets, you get richer in this system. If you're not, you fall further behind. And historically, throughout all empires, throughout history, throughout the world, the debt-based systems always serve multiple agendas: to enrich the rich, keep them richer and amassing more wealth, and keep the poor at the bottom of the food chain. But at some point, the system gets to the end of its life cycle, and they have to introduce a new system. But every time the debt-based system gets to the end of its cycle and the currency reaches the end, the global powers, they love this because it allows them to invest in the new systems that are coming, to profit off that, to control it. And at the same time, it allows governments, historically, and debtors to wipe out their debt. So currency destructions and resets actually serve the elite more than they serve the people. So yes.
So, yeah, what does it concretely mean? Last question for us as investors. How can we protect ourselves in the big wheel, in the bigger system?
The only
Just
thing,
buy Bitcoin, XRP, gold?
the only thing you can do is buy tangible assets that will hold their value over time. So it depends where you are in your wealth building journey. Okay. But there are a few tangible assets, meaning physical assets, that have historically proved to hold their value even through currency collapses and resets. And one of them is real estate. Another one is gold, land, things of that nature. As for the cryptocurrencies and digital assets, people have to be very strategic and selective with the digital assets you choose. if it does not have real use case and utility, strong fundamentals for long-term growth potential, then you don't know if it will likely survive in the future or not. So you have to take these criteria into consideration. For example, the digital assets I invest in, I look for specific check boxes that need to check off the list, specific criteria. One thing I like to look at is staying power. Have they been around for a long time? Because usually, if they have been around for a long time, this suggests that they have the ability to endure bad times and good times. It's called staying power. The second thing I look for is, do they have an economic moat? Economic moat means, do they have a strategic advantage that their competitors cannot overtake or overcome? Strategic advantage over their competitors. The third thing I look at is their team and collaboration of the project. This is so critical because they could have the best technology, but if the people behind them are not big players with real power and money tied to the asset or the company, then maybe they won't survive. Because at the end of the day, it's a lot about trust and people.
Yeah.
So just because it's the best technology does not mean always it's going to be the winner. You have to take into consideration all the different factors. And I also look at how big is the problem they're solving for the powers, the financial institutions. The bigger the problem, the more critical the solution in need. And I also look at how superior is the solution, the tech for the problem they are solving. So the key is to find digital assets that you understand very well, that have long-term growth potential. Because if they do, they will likely go up in value over time when the technology is adopted by institutions and when demand continues to increase over time.
Thank you, Wendell. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. I think many people don't usually connect gold, XRP, Bitcoin, stablecoins in one bigger picture, but you've made it very clear. For everyone watching, make sure to check out Wendell's channel, Black Swan Capitalists, for more of his deep dives into crypto. Wendell, it's been a real pleasure having you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I know you did all the asking of the questions, but still, we had a good little talk before. So, yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Goodbye.
All right, take care.
So that's it for today's conversation with Wendell. If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out my other interviews, for example with Stefan Winheller, where we dive into the tricky world of crypto taxes, or with Kevin, he's an active researcher focused on XRP. Until next time, stay as fascinated by crypto as I am. Bye, thank you.